Headquarters is open Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 10 to 2. And in advance, I'd like to thank all the people that stopped by the headquarters and donated more than 300 pounds of food and drinks that will go to the Tohono Nation. So thank you for everyone that made that donation. We are now collecting flip-flops, adults and children's sizes. These will be given to Casa Alitas through December the 13th. So please drop by the headquarters, bring your flip-flops, not used ones, new ones. You can't bring in those last year's retreads. Also, if you've got that hard to buy for Christmas, male or female, you can drop by the headquarters and give them one of those democratic items that we have put out there. We have lots of masks and signs and all kinds of, for the really hard to buy Democrat in your life. And we, from the staff at headquarters, they would like to wish you season's greetings. So thank you. Stop by, say hello, talk to them. They are always happy to talk to you. And I think that just about covers it. I have a group of people that are pretty special. They have been working hard, and they've been keeping me laughing the whole time. So I would like to introduce our two samples of our murder mystery dinner theater players.
I'm sure looking forward to dinner tonight here at our beautiful Montezuma Hotel. I hear Chef Pierre is cooking his Saturday night special coq au vin. To think this little town has its own French chef straight from Paris.
Wow. Have you heard? There's some trouble brewing between the new mercantile owner, oh, I don't need this one, do I? Between the new mercantile owner, Robert Richfield, and Ben Stuyvesant.
No, tell me, I've been out of town.
Ben has been flirting with Robert's wife.
What's wrong with that man? He's got a beautiful wife, Senora Maria.
Some men are never satisfied, and that's not all.
Tell me.
Cowpoke Pete has been hanging around the hotel a lot today. I think he's trying to get in Senor Maria's good graces so he can supply all the meat the hotel needs.
Well, Ben will never let him do that. He thinks Pete's a rundown old cowboy, and Cowpoke resents that.
Yeah.
He does resent that. I guess we ought to head home and put on our fancy clothes. Looks like there will be some excitement tonight.
Oh, I hope so. Now you folks here and on Zoom, please join us on Saturday, January 15th at 6 p.m. at the Grill on the Green. This is a GVD fundraiser. Tickets are $75 a piece, available after the program today here, online through the latest GVD email, or at the office.
Now, we're not serving Chef Pierre's famous coq au vin, but we will be offering sirloin, chicken marsala, and a vegetarian option. And you'll find out that the tensions in this sleepy little Arizona town play out. The Arizona town in 1918. I'll give you a hint. Murder is definitely on the menu.
So saddle up in your favorite Western duds. Prizes are in the offing for best costumes and guessing who done it. Thanks for your time. See y'all there.
Yep. And come back to the table.
And now I would like to invite our Vice President of Program to introduce our guest for today, Paul McCreary. Paul?
All right. Well, thank you all for coming in this perfect day, right? 72 degrees and no wind. Okay, I'm going to introduce a really nice guy. I just met Mike. He's truly an outstanding person. I've heard a lot of good things about him, and talking with him, it's easy to see why he has been praised. Mike Robinette, he taught math for 27 years, Tucson, Hermosillo, right, Mike? And at Cameroon for the Peace Corps. I don't know how long he did that, but it sounds interesting. He's been with Normal, and he'll explain what that is, since 2018. He's been the Arizona director and the Southern Arizona director, right? So he's going to be talking about legalization of medical and individual use marijuana. And so that's all I'm going to say. He can take it from there. So he has a lot to say, and get your questions ready for him. He's ready to take them, he said.
Thank you so much. I'm triple back, so I am going to take them out. And thank you to all of you for joining us today. This is exciting. I'm okay without the microphone, I think. Is that okay? Or is
No,
that...
we need it because of the Zoom.
Oh, can I put it here then? Would that, or do I need to hold it?
Let me see.
I don't think so.
I don't know if that'll go in there.
No, it won't.
Okay, let me just hold it. I'm not the best, so just tell me if I'm... Bear with me, because I'm used to teaching, and I tend to be really... See, I'm already out, so they're going to rein me in, so bear with me. Well, let's just get started. I'm Mike Robinette. With Arizona Normal and Southern Arizona Normal, and I did teach for 27 years. My last 17 years were in Oro Valley. I taught at Ironwood Ridge High School. I taught AP Calculus AB and Intro to Calculus. Normal work is certainly not like teaching, but there's some aspects of education in normal as well. How many of you have even, before I even get started, how many of you have heard of normal? 3 people. And I'm going to say normally, people our ages tend to know of normal because normal's been around since 1970. But when I go into a dispensary, if it's a young bud tender, and I'll go, do you know normal? They'll be like, I don't know normal. So let me tell you what normal is first. It literally is the national organization for the reform of marijuana laws. And that's exactly what we do. Normal was started by a lawyer named Keith Strop in 1970 when the nascent drug war from Richard Nixon started, and Normal was started as a reaction to that and has been around now for 50 years. With Arizona Normal, we're the state chapter of the National Normal Organization, and excuse me, and with Southern Arizona Normal, we're a local chapter of the same national organization. Any questions thus far on normal? Okay, well, I am the director of both Arizona Normal and Southern Arizona Normal, and what I want to do is first start by talking to you a little bit about the history of marijuana legalization in Arizona, as well as, after that, kind of talk about what we do and kind of extrapolate on a lot of the legalization ideas as I go through them. And then talk at the end of what our legislative agenda is this year going into the upcoming session. But what I also want to do at the end is, if any of you have questions about marijuana in general, about strains, about, well, how does it affect me if I'm interested in using it for pain? Or if you're interested in what we now jokingly refer to as the gateway drug, CBD, if you're interested in CBD, I can talk about that as well. So if you have any questions, I'm not going to get deep into marijuana itself, the endocannabinoid system, which, by the way, is the one thing we all have in common in this room. We all have an endocannabinoid system, which is what we naturally produce what are called endocannabinoids, and the plant provides us with what are called phytocannabinoids, which work on our endocannabinoid system. And that was just discovered in the early 90s, so it is somewhat new. But I can talk about all that because I kind of wanted to focus more today on policy and what's been going on in the state of Arizona with respect to legalization. So does that sound okay for all of you? Stop me if you have any questions. I'm going to kind of start going, and if I get all excited, bear with me because I do tend to get a little bit passionate about the subject. So let me just start with the brief history. Believe it or not, in 1996, we all know that California legalized medical marijuana. And by the way, also, before I go further, I do want to say, if back in the day there was a real long conversation and a philosophical sort of debate about, do we say marijuana or do we say cannabis? And it's kind of hard for me not to say marijuana, but well, because it's in the name of the organization I represent. I find marijuana to be a beautiful name, or a beautiful word. So I do tend to still use marijuana. Some people feel that we professionalize marijuana by saying cannabis. However, I will say this. There's been some studies actually that show that the use of the word marijuana or the use of the word cannabis does not make really any difference. Now, that is different than the use of the word recreational versus the use of the word adult use. I will never say recreational because as soon as you say recreational, what does that do? It implies that marijuana is fun, and the last thing any prohibitionist wants to hear is marijuana is fun. You know what I mean? So we're real careful in this marijuana space to not say recreational. In fact, I get a little cringe when people do say recreational because we tend to prefer to say adult use. Only because, as I said, recreational implies fun, and damn it, we better not be having fun. And for full disclosure, I am a 37-year consumer, and I'm also a current patient in the state of Arizona. So, real quick, so in '96, California actually passed medical marijuana. First state in the nation to do so. But believe it or not, in that same year, Arizonans passed Prop 200, which was the Drug Medicalization Prevention and Control Act. 65% of Arizona voters passed Prop 200 in 1996. And it was more of a drug reform kind of initiative, but there was an aspect in it that said doctors could, here's the problem, quote, prescribe marijuana. Well, the problem is when you use the word prescribe, it puts doctors in direct conflict with something called federal prohibition. And so that word we simply don't say, but they did put it into the initiative. Now, because it was in the initiative, interestingly enough, Barry Goldwater was the honorary chair of that Prop 200 campaign, believe it or not. And one of the main sponsors was John Sperling, one of the founders, or the founder of the legislature, repealed the prescription clause like months later. Well, that led to 1998, which was something I know all of you have heard of, the Voter Protection Act. And I want to talk about that in a second. But in 1998, voters came back and tried to reinstate in Prop 300 the clause about prescription and doctors being able to prescribe medical marijuana. But the problem became that it fell through and was ineffective, again, due to that federal dichotomy, or the dichotomy of federal prohibition versus more liberalized state laws. And the fact that even today, doctors cannot prescribe marijuana. They can only, quote, recommend. So, and then Prop 203, or Prop 300, was passed in '98, but again, it's where the voters rejected the elimination of that clause with respect to prescriptions, but it never went anywhere. But what was really important is the voters said enough is enough. If we pass citizen initiatives, we really don't need the legislature to override them and repeal them. So as you know, the Voter Protection Act passed in 1998. It was Prop 105. And what's really cool about the Voter Protection Act is it does two really big things, well, three really big things. One, it prohibits or precludes the legislature's ability to override a citizen initiative. Furthermore, if the legislature wants to do anything to a citizen initiative, change it, amend it, Prop 105, or the Voter Protection Act, states that you must have a supermajority in both chambers, meaning a 3/4 vote in the House and a 3/4 vote in the Senate, to override a citizen initiative. Furthermore, not only do you have to have supermajority in both chambers, whatever is being considered has to be deemed a furtherance of the act. And what's interesting about that then is that there's no way now that a legislature could come in and repeal Prop 207, for example. We're never going back to the world of illegal marijuana in Arizona because the legislature can't. But I'll talk about that later. And what's interesting enough with that is Prop 205 and the Voter Protection Act is a curse and a real aid for us. One, both the Arizona Medical Marijuana Act, which I'll get to in a second, as well as Prop 207, which was basically the legalization initiative for adult use. Because both are citizen initiatives, unless there's something really crazy, both require a 3/4 vote up in both chambers to change them or to amend them. That really gives us a lot of leeway in beating bad bills, and it helps us to beat bad bills sometimes, but it also hurts us in passing good bills because we need 3/4 vote instead of an up and down 51% vote. But I'll get to that when we get to the AMA and the Prop 207. But so in 96, Arizona did it. They attempted to actually legalize medical marijuana where doctors could, quote, prescribe, but then the legislature pushed back. Then we have the Voter Protection Act. Then in 2002, Arizonans came back again, and they decided that, well, we're going to try the medical cannabis initiative, which would allow 2 ounces for patients, as well as 2 plants, and then decriminalize 2 ounces for any other use. But unfortunately, that failed with a 42.7% yes vote. What you see is 65% in 96 voted yes, but now we're in 2002, and now we can't get anything passed. 42.7% only voted yes for that specific proposition in 2002. Interestingly enough, the gubernatorial candidates in Arizona that year, both Janet Napolitano and Matt Salmon, both were against that proposition. And the drug czar at that time, his name was John P. Walters, he traversed the state campaigning against the initiative. So we did have some now blowback relative to legalization, which led to 2002. So 8 years later, from 2002, led to 2010, where we finally, just barely squeaked by, finally a win with marijuana legalization, and that was Prop 203, or the Arizona Medical Marijuana Act, which is affectionately called AMA. That passed by, get this, 50.1% yes votes. Barely squeaked by. And what that did in essence is for anyone who becomes recommended and qualified as a patient in Arizona, you can possess up to 2.5 ounces of flower, which is the bud of the plant, every 2 weeks. And how that works as a patient is you have a running total. So let's say I go into a dispensary going home today and I buy an ounce. Well, that ounce is taken out of my allotment, and then I get that ounce back in 2 weeks. So it's kind of a running thing that as you deplete your allotment, you can replenish it every 2 weeks. And so that's kind of how it works. But it also allowed for grow rights up to 12 plants for those people who were not within a 25-mile radius of an actual dispensary, and limited dispensaries at that time to 124. With the addition of some backfill relative to rural dispensaries, and then with the social equity licenses coming up, which I'll talk about with 207, we will be probably, when it's all said and done, at 156 dispensaries in the state of Arizona. I want to talk more about that in a little bit as well. After a lawsuit, of course, filed by Jan Brewer and Tom Horn in 2010, that lawsuit was dismissed in 12, and the first dispensary opened in Arizona in December of 2012. So let's go ahead and give a big hand to 2012 when the first dispensary opened in Arizona. But here's the thing. It wasn't all smooth sailing. There was a prohibitionist by the name of Bill Montgomery, who was the Maricopa County attorney at one point and is now was appointed by our governor to be on the Supreme Court of Arizona. He challenged some things through the years, leading up to the most horrific challenge to AMA that happened in its now 11-year existence was, I'm sure all of you probably heard this name, Sheila Polk. We should do like the Gaslight Theater. Every time I say Sheila Polk, we should all go, boo, because she's a villain! Yeah. Boo! So, okay, that's what I like to see, some participation. So anyway, so Sheila Polk thank you so much. Let me try one more time. So anyway, Sheila Polk, that's what I like to hear. So anyway, Sheila Polk, thank you. Okay, that's probably good. So anyway, that person who's the county attorney in Prescott, she's a nightmare. She was running an organization called Mat Force as well. If you've ever seen poor old Sally Schindel, who writes op-eds all the time as marijuana is the most harmful thing in the world, they're sort of, we were talking a little bit about this, the people that are at that level are really blinded by their dogma and can't see past their dogma. The dogma prevents them from thinking in common sense, from thinking rationally, and also really from thinking compassionately about other human beings who can benefit from the use of marijuana. So that's my little 2 cents opinion editorial. But what's interesting about Arizona, and this is going to come back to why I mentioned Sheila Polk. Arizona, believe it. Oh, thank you so much. Music to my ears. But why I mentioned her is this. Arizona actually defines marijuana and cannabis differently. It actually, in state statute, and this comes from the early 70s, it defines, our state prior to, of course, AMA and 207, defined marijuana as the plant. And that, we were the last state to have felony charges for personal possession. So before, AMA carved out, an exemption for patients, and before 207 carved out a big exemption for anyone 21 years and older. Anything in the state of Arizona from a speck to 2 pounds was a felony 6. Let that sink in. A felony 6 for simple possession. Now, granted, in Pima County, Barbara Lawal, the 24-year attorney, she did 20 years ago say run everything that's minor possession through the misdemeanor court, and that did happen in Tucson. However, one of the problems that her office did do up until the end of her tenure was this. Cannabis is defined separately from marijuana. Cannabis is the extract of the plant. It's defined as a felony for narcotic. Meaning, what Barbara Lawal's office was even doing up until the end of her tenure is, I'm sure if any of you have seen someone with a cartridge called a vape pen, those things patients have all the time. But if you weren't a patient in Tucson and if you got arrested with a vape cart, Barbara Lawal's office was charging you with a felony 4. It's horrific. Meaning also when I get the expungements, people go, wait a minute, can you expunge felonies? Certainly. Anybody who got a vape cart charge has got a felony 4. We can easily expunge that. But I'm going to get to that as well. This will, if you guys, we'll take a break about 6 o'clock tonight. We'll get some dinner and then I'll come back and finish up probably at midnight. But I'll get to all that as well. But what's interesting in this case is Sheila Pope relied on that oh, damn, that's right. Sheila Pope relied on that difference in statute to basically prosecute a man a person of color by the name of Rodney Jones in Prescott Valley. Rodney Jones got caught with 0.05 ounces of hashish, so a very, very small amount of hashish. He was charged with felony 4. He was also charged, and he had a card at the time. He was a patient at the time. But what that person, Boo, said was this. He got charged also for the little glass container was in as paraphernalia. So not only did he get a felony 4, of course, then he had a paraphernalia charge as well, which is very common in Arizona. If you ever got arrested in the past, if it was even a possession of 1/8 of an ounce, you not only got arrested for that possession, you also got charged. If it was in a plastic bag, that plastic bag was a paraphernalia. If you had rolling papers, those rolling papers were paraphernalia. I can't begin to tell you the horror stories we hear as we do expungement clinics, and I'll get to that in a moment as well. But what happened is Rodney Jones went to jail for 2.5 years for that 0.05 ounces of hashish. I know, and I can see the pain in your faces as well. And the amount of lives that have been ruined by the prohibition of marijuana in Arizona, particularly those who have been disproportionately impacted by these laws, is incredibly horrific. But what happened then is that was Sheila Pope. Boo! That was her case. So they appealed that case. Rodney Jones appealed. And in 2019, early 2000, maybe even late 2018, that case was upheld by the appeals court. And what that meant is in Arizona, everything that is considered an extract, meaning edibles, what we call dabs or shatter or any concentrated marijuana product, all of that, vape pens, simple vape pens, which between you and I, vape pens are pretty innocuous. I can tell you that you will get, quote, I don't know how to explain this, but you will get, quote, higher off of simple flower than off of vape cartridges. They do not provide the entourage effect, which only flower can. I sometimes don't believe the hype that if you, with live rosin cartridges will provide the entourage. The entourage effect is basically what you get from flower. When you consume it, you're taking advantage of all the cannabinoids and terpenes that are in the specific flower. And if you have questions on all that, and I also have some terpene cannabinoid cards for educational purposes as well, I'll get to that also. But what happened is, when that appeals court decision came down on the Jones case, the entire state basically then, at that point was about 30% of the medical marijuana market was concentrates. They were all illegal or deemed illegal. But only a few dispensaries in Arizona actually said, okay, we'll take them off our shelves. I was telling you earlier, what the dispensaries that I go to in Tucson did, they just put up signs saying, warning, buy at your own risk. So all of us were buying at our own risk and still consuming concentrates. But it had a real chilling effect on the industry and fear that, you know, you could really destroy a controlled market if you eliminate 30-40% of what it sells. Furthermore, if you try to tamp down or you try to get rid of concentrates, and I'm going to talk about this at the end also, if you try to tamp down on concentrates, what you do is you will send people back into the underground economy, and that's where houses blow up. That's where things go wrong when people try to do extractions on their own. It's not a pretty sight. That's why when you hear an apartment blew up, it's generally someone trying to do their own extractions. So we don't want that. We want a controlled market where all products are legal. But Jones' case threw a real wrench into that. But after 6 months of fear, the Arizona Supreme Court sided unanimously with Jones. And so now in our state, Jones' case was overridden and concentrates are purely legal. But that had to be clarified in Prop 207, that the voters were not only voting, what that person said in Yavapai County was, the voters didn't intend to legalize concentrates. They only meant to legalize flour. That kind of, I'm a politician and I'm going to say what you were thinking even though I know you weren't thinking that. That's what happened. She attached the thought to voters that voters had no idea they were legalizing in the Medical Marijuana Act concentrates as well as flour. Well, anyone who is in the world of consumption, patient or adult use, knows that marijuana includes concentrates. In fact, there are many people who never ever smoke flour but still rely on the medical benefits of marijuana, and those people use edibles. That's a concentrate. Those people do vapes. So there are other ways to get around the actual consumption of what we call flour. But that really put the fear of God into everyone in the medical marijuana program, but then it's been overridden, and Prop 207 did a great job to make sure the voters, that it was spelled out that we were voting to legalize both the plant and everything that can be extracted from it. So that happened in 2010, culminating in the Jones case, a victory in 2019. Interestingly enough, is that same day that the Jones case passed, we actually passed the omnibus testing bill. Of course, as being the last state with felony possession charges, we of course were the last state too that had unmandated testing for medical marijuana. We were the last state that had a medical marijuana program without mandatory testing. So there was a 12-hour period where we were able to pass SB 1494, which was our omnibus testing bill, and the Jones case happened. So those were two, in like 12 hours, two major marijuana victories in the state of Arizona. Then came 2016. And 2016 is when the big money got involved to beat back legalization. You might recall, this is only 5 years ago now. In 15, Prop 205 attempted to legalize adult use up to an ounce, as well as 6 plans for grow rights. It failed at 48.7%. But you might ask then, well, if we were sort of trending and we legalized medical, why did it fail? Well, get this. Our governor, Governor Doug Ducey, maybe we should go boo. No, Normal's nonpartisan, but we're booing him for his prohibitionist antics. But Ducey, he did fundraising to oppose 205 in 16. Get this, I'm even going to tell you the amounts. $918,000 spent by the Arizona Chamber of Commerce to fight legalization that year. $1 million, right after I bought tires from them. $1 million came from Discount Tire that I've had to protest or boycott for 4 years now because the owner of Discount Tire donated $1 million against legalization in our state. $1 million. He has since died. But that made me boycott Discount Tire for a very long time. Another person who's since passed, Sheldon Adelson, the casino magnate out of Las Vegas, he donated $500,000 to fight legalization in the state of Arizona. And get this, your typical Insys, the fentanyl manufacturer out of Scottsdale, donated $500,000 as well. Well, they're in jail now, so they're not effective anymore in fighting marijuana legalization. But what's funny is a forensics analysis of the 2016 legalization campaign discovered that it was that big money, coupled with the fact that there was a splintering of the cannabis community that year, where half the community said, we're not going to vote for this. There are accusations that Normal was a sellout, because in all honesty, there's a cannabis community, but it's not necessarily the most coalesced cannabis community. There are people on the far left of the community that believe that what we call they're the free the weed types. They believe that there should be no regulation at all around marijuana. You should be able to take a wheelbarrow into the farmer's market and sell untested product to anybody who will buy it. We don't support that. We support a controlled market. But sometimes the free the weed people do not support legalization efforts because they will never go far enough for them. And so that splintering of the community as well as all that big money sunk legalization in 2016, leading us finally to 2020. And you know what passed in 2020? Just a minor thing called the Smart and Safe Arizona Act, or more affectionately known as Prop 207. Arizona NORML and Southern Arizona NORML and our volunteers, we did 65,000 phone bank calls and did live streams and did everything and anything. We were fully on board to get that proposition to pass. And we're incredibly pleased to say that Prop 207 passed in Arizona resoundingly by a 60-40 vote. One of the largest margins of victory for any adult use initiative in any state in the United States. That's worth an applause. That's worth an applause. When we gathered signatures before COVID, all we heard, all you have to do is put up a sign that says, sign here to legalize. You don't have to say who you are or what you represent. People will come to your table and go, is it finally getting done this year? And I think Arizonans spoke that we've had enough of prohibition in the state of Arizona, and 60-40 is huge. Giant victory for a citizen initiative. So big thumbs up to that. Of course, there was opposition, but there was not a lot of moneyed opposition. There was one woman by the name of Lisa James, and I always get concerned when I name the names of the prohibitionist organizations because they sound so innocuous, but they're not. Like Lisa James she was with Arizonans for Responsible Drug Policy. Well, what is responsible drug policy to the Arizonans for responsible drug policy? Smart approaches to marijuana. Kevin Sabbath's group. Kevin Sabbath served in the Obama administration, but he is an utter prohibitionist now. He had his hand in what went wrong in Colorado this year, and I'm going to talk about that as well. But get this. I don't know if it was ironic or not, but the campaign turned in 420,000 signatures. And we just barely got past, when the signatures were all validated, we just barely got past the 237 and change signature goal. But we were able to get it on the ballot. It was challenged by Lisa James' organization, which is funded by, I'm sure you know this name, Kathy Harrod or Harrod, I can't even remember the names, Arizona something she's with. She helped to fund that, but they challenged 207 in court. They challenged it over the fact that you know how initiatives have to have that 100-word summary? They challenged that the summary didn't summarize the initiative enough or did not spell it out enough. That challenge failed both in Superior Court and the Supreme Court. So let me explain to you why, and why 207 is so important to consumers in Arizona, and why Arizona NORML ourselves, why we supported it. One, obviously, at this point in Arizona, anyone who consumes marijuana responsibly is never going to be hassled again by law enforcement, is never going to have their life adversely affected by such consumption. That is well worth an applause, because that's powerful. That's powerful to live in a state where the adult use of marijuana is accepted and the responsible use is okay. That no law enforcement person can hassle me for consuming. It's the same for me as a patient, but that's really positive. So what it did is it legalized up to an ounce of flour, or we mentioned concentrates, up to 5 grams of concentrate. 207 also decriminalized up to 2.5 ounces of flour and up to 12.5 grams of concentrate. What that means by decriminalization, it's a petty offense. But anything over 2.5 ounces reverts back to old statute, unfortunately. We're just not there yet. But it also then, what's interesting, and I don't know if, this is not a real known fact in Arizona. Arizona is a zero-tolerance drug DUI state. And before AMA even, when patients got a carve-out for protection, if you were pulled over and there was a suspicion that you were impaired, all it took was a blood draw. And we all know that anyone who consumes marijuana regularly, the inactive metabolites are in our system for up to 6 to 8 weeks. And all it takes is a blood draw with inactive metabolites, meaning you don't even have to be impaired to get a DUI. And so that is Arizona. We're a zero tolerance drug DUI state, meaning the blood draw of inactive or active metabolites deems you impaired in the eyes of the law. The problem becomes, though, is that how can you make something legal? And this started with AMA in 2010. How can you make a substance legal and say it's okay to consume it, but then basically say, well, you can consume it all you want, but you're never going to get behind the wheel of a car, which is crazy. So what happened is there's both a carve-out, what we call a DUI protection in both the Medical Marijuana Act as well as Prop 207. And that carve-out is that a simple blood draw is not sufficient, or the presence of metabolites is not sufficient to deem one impaired. You must be proven impaired to the slightest degree. And what that means is someone's going to have to, either a drug recognition expert or a law officer has to have you out of the car and demonstrate that you're impaired. You can't just get a blood draw and be impaired. So there is DUI protection for consumers now, both in AMA. It's the same language in AMA that found its way into 207. That language is the same, that you cannot be proven impaired unless you are by the inactive or active blood draw of metabolites, but you can be proven impaired to the slightest degree. That's the only way that you can be deemed impaired by law enforcement, if there's been field sobriety tests. And it's one of the most heartbreaking things we deal with in expungement clinics is people come in with cannabis DUIs, and there's nothing we can do for them. Even though they were arrested and quite potentially were charged based on the presence of inactive metabolites, that charge sticks until we can get something better for that. And that's incredibly unfair. But that's where we are right now. A couple of other things relative to consumers that were really important to us as normal were grow rights. Inevitably, you will have people in the cannabis community that absolutely loathe big cannabis and dispensaries. And so if you don't like dispensaries, you don't have to ever go to one. You have grow rights in the state of Arizona. Anyone over 21 can grow up to 6 plants. You keep the harvest. And if you have more than one 21-year-old in your house, like 2 or more or 3, you can grow up to 12 plants. So what that did is it, in essence, eliminated the whole 25-mile radius rule with the medical program. Because now everyone in this state has grow rights of 6 and 12 plants, depending on how many people are in your house, which is great. Another really powerful thing that we supported that was part of 207 was, at this point in Arizona, both the smell of burnt or raw marijuana is not indicative of a crime being committed because it's legal. So that was used all the time. If you ever watched any like cop shows or whatever, it's always, I smell marijuana. Even the high school kids, when I taught at Ironwood Ridge High School, would tell me nonstop, Oro Valley Police will say, oh, we smell marijuana, to try to trick people into allowing them to search. So now in this state, the smell of burnt or raw marijuana cannot get you in trouble. However, there's a carve-out, and it's what we always tell everyone when we advocate. Whatever you do, do not smoke flour in your car. Because all of you, I'm sure, have smelled the burnt flour before. It's distinctive. It smells like, it's kind of, you know what that smell is? Well, the problem is, if a law enforcement officer thinks that there's a suspicion of a DUI occurring, the smell of burnt marijuana can be used to further that DUI investigation, which is why we always say, whatever you do, don't smoke in your car and drive. I get calls all the time from people, oh, I got pulled over, and then they say, and the first thing I ask, well, what I'll hear is, yeah, I just smoked a joint. And I'm like, there's not a lot we can do there if your car smells of burnt marijuana and you're driving. There's not even a carve-out legally that says, whoa, but it's legal, because it's not legal to drive impaired, and we don't support impaired driving. But what we do support is a fair application of the law to cannabis consumers. And that is that carve-out. So, couple other big things to the consumer. I'm going to talk about this. In fact, I'm going to talk about this right now. You know, I've talked about expungements. Believe it or not, Prop 207, for the first time, set precedent in Arizona with the word expungement. And probably you guys are probably sitting there going, what the hell is an expungement? Because we suspect that a lot of people still don't really understand the word expungement. It kind of sounds odd. It kind of sounds like a kitchen cleaning product or something. Could you hand me the expungement? We'll clean up the counter. But expungement is literally an erase and clearing of your record to the point where your record can no longer be seen by anyone other than you and your attorney. And that's really powerful. And what Prop 207 did is it established expungement. It started the process of expungement on July 12th of this year. And what it stated was, and I'm going to talk about why it's great, but why it needs to be improved. What expungement does is, Prop 207 defines that anyone with a charge up to 2.5 ounces or less, or 12.5 of flour, or 12.5 grams of concentrate, what 207 says that can all be erased. As well as 6 plants being grown for personal consumption can be erased. As well as any and all marijuana paraphernalia convictions can all be erased. Now, the bad thing about this is Prop 207 put the burden on the petitioner, or the burden on the person who has been arrested to submit a petition to have those charges expunged. What we would like to see, having done 51 free expungement clinics since June of this year, we would like to see the burden removed from the petitioner and the burden be placed back on the courts and the prosecutor. And so one of our legislative agenda items and our #1 priority in this upcoming session is to get a bill passed that at least allows some sort of what we call universal and automatic expungement, meaning that the prosecutor or the courts pull the records and expunge, not the other way around, that the person who was convicted and who has been deleteriously affected by that arrest or conviction, that then they have to petition the court. And that's how it's set up now. So we'd like to see that reversed, because we know for a fact, in having done 51 clinics, and we've done a clinic in every county other than we're going to do a Pinal County clinic in December. We will have done a clinic in every county in Arizona, and we'll be at about 58 to 60 by the end of just this year with respect to doing clinics. But the problem is, we know there's hundreds of thousands of people in Arizona who are eligible for expungement. We know just in Pima County there's about 60,000 people who are eligible for expungement. And we're not reaching them through clinics. We're doing a good job getting the word out. We're doing a good job of bringing people in, but we're not reaching the magnitudes of people that exist who could be helped. What's interesting, though, is that the Maricopa County Attorney's Office has actually proactively expunged 7,000 convictions. And you'd think, well, how is that? When that's the history of Bill Montgomery, and there's issues with the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, but we had a really productive meeting with that office just this last week, and they've been incredibly proactive on what they're doing. Juxtapose that to the Pima County Attorney's Office, which has not done much of anything with respect to pulling and doing it on their own. So we're working to try to ameliorate that. But the best way to do it is to go through legislation to get expungements to be both universal and automatic. Now, this does come back to Prop 105, or the Voter Protection Act. Prop 207 did a great job at the end of 207 carving out what specific acts would forward the purpose of the act of 207. One of those is to do a universal and automatic expungement program. So it's fully constitutional to do that. It's fully legal according to 207. We fingers crossed that we can at least get a limited universal and automatic expungement program to benefit all Arizonans after this legislative session.